It's a pleasure to be back on, Alex. Well, basically, it's a system, and that's what it is. It's a system and a philosophy, which is also a religion with its own belief system, that really has been around since commerce began, organized commerce. And organized commerce, we don't even know how old it is. We have the ancient traders, they've even dug up Sumer, for instance, and found out there's another group, pre-existed Sumer, who were into trading. They lived very well. We know that from their indoor plumbing and stuff like that, thousands of years ago. And they had the trade routes all the way to China, right through the Middle East and Asia. So trading is the key to it, because along with trading comes something called money. And it's different from barter, where where two people can literally argue over the price of a sack of potatoes versus a sack of oatmeal. Once you get a third party coming in with money, then you're under their directives, because they can basically decide how much that money is worth today or tomorrow, or they value it or whatever. And the ancient traders, we do know this from the Phoenicians, for instance, they had to not only trade with people, but they had to, and they were seafarers as well, with a huge navy to trade, but they had to also get all these different cultures that they met along the way to accept this thing called money, which they never used, most of them, before. They'd never seen money, heard of it. It was an alien thought, just like the American Indians. It was an alien idea, this money. And so eventually, over time, they got people to accept money, and they did it by giving them loans to countries, generally to the kings or the head chief or whoever of a particular area or island. And from then on, basically, they started the debt system. And as we all know, we're still in the same system today. It's never failed. Eventually, the king gets rather spoiled. He wants all the goodies that he's shown from these traders as they come into port every so often. He borrows more. And eventually it comes time to pay him back, and he's rather shocked to find out how much it's going to cost. So the Phoenicians did deals with him. We know this for a fact. The Phoenicians used to get the kings to assemble men for armies, pay them with the same thing called money. That's a key to armies as well. An army is no use, an organized army, if you can't pay them with something. They tend to go home, they get bored and get fed up. So they used that, and they lent the king money for paying the soldiers too, and then they go off and invade a country that would not accept the trade, that would not accept the money, and so on. And we find this all the way down through into even the Spartan wars, where the Spartans for 100 years fought off this outside trade system with its money system. And the Phoenicians not only traded with money, it was mainly silver at that time. They had standardized the size of the coinage everywhere. It doesn't matter whose head was on it, for different countries, as long as it weighed the same. So they were standardizing the money system just like the IMF is today. Same idea. And so they conquered down through the ages. And then they formed, we find this around the Middle Ages, massive leagues, they called them. There were leagues, you had the Hanseatic leagues and various other leagues of trading countries, and like a big corporation, you might say. And they were based at that time in Venice and in Holland. Holland came out of nowhere because the money men came in. That's how empires arise. They don't arise because someone's a great conqueror. They actually arise because those with the money move into that country with the money and the know-how, and they rise it up. They move down through time and skip to different countries when it suits them. We know, for instance, that even from Holland, they hopped over to London and basically created London in the form that we know it today. So it's a moneyed system. It's a trading system. And money is the key to controlling everything. That's what Rothschild said when he took over the Bank of England. And I don't believe either, by the way, that it wasn't a set-up to take over the bank. It was prearranged with the nobility already in Britain to allow it to happen. Because if Rothschild had bankrupted every nobility, find out too, Alex, I mean, see, they brought in King George and his family over from Prussia. Now, Prussia is part of the pre-existing Germany, the Germanic regions. It was one of the first countries to give up in Germany. They actually put up their... When they run out of royalty, they would put it up for a vote for those with the biggest, like an auction sale. And that present, even today's present group who took over as the Georges, belonged to the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha houses. These were three areas of the Germanic and Prussian regions which they owned. They were princedoms. They bought them over and they became the royalty. Their actual background was in trading themselves, so they belonged to the same group as the Rothschilds. Yes, that's what they did too. They drafted their men up and sold them off. And during the American War of Revolution, they brought in a lot of Hessian troops because George was a Hessian himself. Basically, that was his area in Germany. He still owned that part of it. But you'll find, for instance, the Rothschilds and the different female lineages, especially of the Rothschilds, are all intermarried with the royalty of the whole of Europe. And so they're really one and all the same people. So, as I say, that's a big part of it. So you have money, you have trading, you have intermarriage of very powerful families. And there's nothing better than to give your daughter, for instance, to a king, because now you're allied with that king and you take the royal titles, your offspring become the heirs down the road, and you can control things. And you even find, it's the astonishing things in history that really get to you when you find, an easy example, for instance, is 9/11, where down the road in New York, the day that it happened, George Bush's father was having a meeting with the Laden family, the Ben Laden family, because they have a corporation, the Bushes and the Laden families, to build bomb-proof structures across the world. Not only that, too, when the first 9/11 bombing took place, people forget about it. They had to basically retrofit the whole buildings to make sure they were sound. Well, it was their company that got the job to retrofit it, and it took them over a year and a half. I think that's when they laid the explosives, personally. That's what they did. I really do believe that. But anyway, there's a coincidence right there. So we go to war because with the Bush basically facing Ben Laden in the comic strips, that is. And meanwhile, the same families have a business enterprise. That's almost impossible. Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's a cartoon show we're given where the Bushes and the Ladens, out of billions of people on the planet, just happen to be in a business enterprise, and the same countries end up at war and all that kind of stuff. And then you go into FDR, for instance. FDR, whose wife was a rabid communist. She loved the Soviet system. She loved the techniques of mind control that Pavlov was doing. She went over to see Pavlov, and she thought the same system should be brought to America, because although the children were not very happy and laughing and joking on the way to school, they were so orderly, and she was so impressed by this orderly, how they were orderly and collective. So, but the thing is, too, in one of her books, she put down the genealogy of FDR and herself, because she was a cousin of FDR. They intermarry to keep power and wealth amongst themselves. And you find that the Sachs family, who initially funded Hitler to power, was a relative of FDR. And again, it's the same kind of Sachs family of Goldman Sachs, basically. You can change the name and a spelling a little bit here and there, which is a favorite trick of theirs down through the ages. But it's the same bunch, really, running the show. And he brought in a New Deal. Now, people don't realize when a president gives you an address to the nation and calls something a New Deal, he's giving you something that supersedes or replaces the Constitution, because this is the century of change. Now, these characters all know what they mean by the century of change. It's the culmination of their centuries-long war to take over a world, standardize the world, basically reduce the population to a manageable level. They've had science is at the top of the tree when it comes to their belief system. They believe that with science and sciences, then they can, from the earliest times, even when Rosicrucianism, which is a front group, basically, to help the dominant group. When Rosicrucian broke out really in France, they had posters out there all over Paris one morning, and they talked about the ability to give longevity to those who would help serve them. And they were really into real chemistry, not alchemy. Alchemy was a front for them. But they were into real chemistry, absolutely. And they can take whole chunks of history away. They've done it before, because we know darn well that there were people here in the Americas long before Columbus Yes, the studying of, as I've always said, we see so many nature programs on television, but we don't realize that mankind has been the most studied creature on the planet for thousands of years. If you want to dominate the planet, you don't have to dominate the ants. You want to dominate people, and you have to know how people think, how they tick. And it's quite easy, actually, because the easiest thing is to go into so-called primitive societies and see the microcosm of what really matters. Everything else comes from those primitive ideas, lifestyles, taboos, and so on. You simply amplify it into a more complex system. They're really all the same. And they understand how human beings interact with each other and how they have certain emotions, how they're driven really by emotions. That's the key to it. That's what Bernays came out with too. You can literally modify the behavior of a whole continent or a whole world by pandering to these subconscious desires and emotions, and get people to buy things they don't even really, they've never thought of before, until the ads come out to make them want this thing for the first time. It's the same thing with us. We have the need to mate with people, for instance, and so people mate. They form tribes. Small tribes. The tribes have their various taboos that helps them to survive. Everyone knows the rules. You don't need police. And they're generally very self-sufficient, completely self-sufficient, in fact. Of course, we find from the 1800s, for instance, when the same organization that put Charles Darwin out there. Now, Darwin was put out there by the Royal Society. In fact, Wallace was the guy they took most of the writings about evolution from, but they also used Charles Darwin's father and grandfather's writings because they were both writing about evolution. This is a belief system within a religion that was far, far older than Darwin. And we know the Darwins themselves practiced this religion by only intermarrying the same family, the Wedgwood family, for many generations. That was part of this religion, intermarriage with special types to try and breed special genes. And Plato actually wrote about it thousands of years before that, 2,300 years before. Plato talks about if you want good scientists, good mathematicians, then you simply intermarry a male and a female who are good at mathematics, and then take the children, interbreed them, and so on until you're pretty well guaranteed a good mathematician. And it's the same with all other aspects of life. Well, we have that today, and we've had it for a long time. The Rothschilds are an example with that. They only marry their nieces. And so, and that used to astound me. I said, why would dynasties not change? Why not? Why wouldn't you get a guy coming along saying, well, I don't want to be a banker, Daddy. I'd rather be something else, an actor or something. It doesn't happen. They're pretty well guaranteed to be just like their fathers, you see. But they also have the addition of a reinforcement of a particular education from their family and from special higher priests into their particular lineages, their histories, and their function. Well, again, to get the end game, you have to go back into their ancient belief system, which is that basically the world was created all wrong, and their job is to perfect that which was left imperfect, which means through science they would perfect the world, everything in it. We see that with the modification of plants and trees and everything today, and man himself, of course, because they, being a dominant psychopathic type, really, and you can certainly pass on psychopathy. It's the same thing. If you want a pit bull, you can breed a good pit bull by interbreeding pit bulls, and you're guaranteed to have the same kind of offspring. Well, it's the same with these characters. Down through the ages, they picked the victorious type, the type who dominated whole countries eventually, either through warfare directly or through owning the kings and queens who did the wars for you. So they're very aggressive, but they also believe that they can alter man himself. Yeah, and what they don't mention, of course, in all their articles is that, you see, they were the ones who in the 1800s especially came out openly with guys like H.G. Wells, who was specially trained by Huxley's grandfather, Thomas Huxley, who was the best friend of Charles Darwin. And H.G. Wells, with a bunch of other guys trained to be authors, to put stuff out there for the public to be amazed by and even want to follow, in fact. H.G. Wells came out with the idea of free love. We've got to destroy marriage altogether because marriage is the basic institution of the tribe, be it primitive or advanced. And if you destroy that, you destroy basically the tribe's ability to, and the Huxleys too. They all belong to the same families, actually. They're all related, that whole bunch you just mentioned. And what you find, too, is to say, if you destroy the basic tribal necessities, then you destroy the tribe, and they won't fight, you see. They're lost. If you look at the Darwin theory of an advanced civilization going into a less advanced civilization, the advanced will always triumph. That's what they tell you. And what they use for an example is what happened to America when the white man came in, and what happened to the American Indians. The writings of John Stuart Mill is very good on this, because they knew in the 1700s what would happen to the Indians. That's right. Even Bush Sr., when he came out with his speech on the New World Order, he said it's coming into view. It's coming into view. And what he meant by that is the coming new American century. This is the century of change. That academia were using that term for 50 years in the 20th century. The century of change with the 21st century. That's where they had to ramp ahead, because they'd already dumbed down the people with inoculations and so on, and again bringing in processed food. Just certain, and it also destroyed pretty well, again, all the natural things that bound the people together. Marriage was totally destroyed by the end of the 20th century because there was an attack on it. And even that whole area is so fascinating to read, that the sectors that were put out there to bring down the family units, to bring in the drugs, the rock and roll, the free love and all the rest of it, the very things that H.G. Wells printed in the late 1800s, to bring in free love and so on. H.G. Wells was more than that. I mean, he made agreements with his 3 wives, I think, never to divulge what he actually got up to. He likes getting spanked and tied up and all this kinky stuff, you know. Most of these guys are perverts, you understand, that work for them higher up and near the top. They're all sadomasochistic types. See, sadomasochism is a big part of this, because a sadomasochist wants to get up into the power ranks when they're psychopathic, and they really worship the person above them. They'll worship them, and they despise the person who down below, even the next level down, even in a military structure, is being weak, and they'll abuse them. So that's your sadomasochist. They flock into being willing servants for these guys who run the world. And this is, again, it's an old technique that's well understood by them. But they always have these odd perversions to do with sadomasochistic tendencies in their sexual life as well. Yeah. Yes, because what we understand is, it's simple. You take the primitive tribe. We're all really just basically primitive, tribal, with tribal instincts. You destroy all of those. You destroy your cultural taboos. And when you have nothing left to hold on to, then you're in free fall, and they can then guide you as to where you're going to go in that new free fall. And that's what they've done with most of society. If they don't replace all that they've destroyed, you end up with the people like the American Indians, who, like in Canada, are simply abject cases. They're chronic alcoholics. All the reasons for living have been taken away. All their old customs are taken away. Things that gave them meaning are destroyed. And that's what they do. Yes, they do. They're still digging them up in Canada, at some of these places, and out west, in fact. But it's very similar to what they've done with the European races that came into North America now, and the Europeans themselves. Their cultures were attacked later in the same way. Once we'd been over the Industrial Revolution, created the scientific things they needed to control us, we all worked towards it. Our dads and grandfathers worked towards it, and they went through universities too. That's right. And that's what you do. It's the end product of a long-term war to destroy everything that made things function and made you independent. And now you won't stand up and fight for anything. That's exactly the goal they had in mind. Yes, I mean, religion's always been used by the powerful organizations that end up taking them over. And you find that I personally see the Old Testament, for instance, in a totally different way than most people. I see it more like a guidebook of practical means of conquering the world, actually. That's how I see it. I see the New Testament with a different deity in charge altogether from the old bloodthirsty Yahweh. And Christianity in its basic initial form, before it was taken over by, remember, an empire took it over a political military empire took it over and used it. Initial Christianity was very simplistic in its doctrine, and so they used it again. Once it was taken over, they used it again to dominate people for 1,500 years, really. And then the Protestant sect, it was time to bring in the Protestants. And that's how I see it. It was time to bring in the Protestants by those who ruled the money. Yeah, Jesus didn't tell you to leave your head at the door, of the church. You were supposed to use your head. That was the last thing, basically, he did. Once they did that, everything changed. And that wasn't just money changers. That was an international bank of the day. Yeah, you would understand that Judaism, even in that time, had enclaves across the ancient world and all the capital cities of Greece and so on, Athens and all over the place. Rhodes is another famous place for them. But they had to come back so many times per year to the great temple, and they brought incredible fortunes with them. And you couldn't get into the temple, and no Hebrew or Jew, I should say, could get into the temple without the actual money off the land. So you had to exchange your money to go into the temple with your offerings. And basically the guys there were doing foreign exchange. And they made incredible amounts of money on this from these people who came in every day from all over. Yeah, foreign cash was unclean inside the temple, but it was awfully good outside for the guys who exchanged it. And they set the exchange rates, and it literally was a going concern. And they came from all over the ancient world to exchange their monies there. Yeah. Well, you'll never change a system when the people come in to vote to come in and lead the same system of central banking, international banking, debt, which is incredible to start with, since every central bank can print its own money if it wishes to, but they all prefer to borrow from the private banks. That's the con. Everybody, I don't care if you got Mickey Mouse coming in to run for election, if he's going to stand up for the same system, including all the previously owned debt, rather than saying, I'm writing it all off, it's all bogus anyway. We'll print our own money from now on, debt-free. But why are you voting for anybody in the first place, whether it was Donald Duck or anybody else? It's the same system. It's not your system. It's the con system. So you don't have a chance anyway, voting for anybody. Yes, I mean, see, we're already international, and that was the key to setting up international banks and central banks as well, to go with the World Bank, and using this debt con to push it all. Since World War II, the U.S. And Britain and Canada have been funding through their OECD departments. They're all set up during World War II across the third world. We're funding China right now for their medical care. So is the U.S. Canada is building a can-do nuclear reactor, 2 or 3 of them in China, courtesy of the Canadian tax. Yeah. Yeah, and this is all done by the same system that wants you to vote for the next guy who will promise to uphold the same system. Well, I don't think people think in numbers. The mass man, that's how we're used, in fact. We're used as the mass man. We're very predictable. It's the few who change society. It's always been that way. And but what it means, too, is that you have to reevaluate yourself and your own values. Because remember, today's values are different from 50-year ago values. We've been totally turned upside down, in fact. We have to get back to what is personally sustainable. That's the real meaning of sustainability for yourself and for those that you love. And it really means getting back to personal values, and where you can make a promise and keep it, and even make a vow and keep it, and get back to your own integrity. It's a backlash. When you burst people's bubbles, and people do live in a bubble of comfort, they're egocentric because they've been given an egocentric culture, an egocentric culture, and a narcissistic culture. We've also been domesticated, where most folk out there truly want to believe, even though they have little suspicions, but they want to believe that there are special people up there taking care of them because they love them. And when you burst the bubble, it takes away everything. That the ground goes from underneath their feet. They've nothing to stand on. That they've lived a fallacy, and here you are telling them what the evil things are being done to them, and evil things are planned to them. But you're using the documentation from the science magazines, from the mainstream media, from the big organizations and foundations involved, But rather than look at what you're giving them for evidence, they'll attack you personally. You see, I've seen the technique work before, and I went through, when Britain was being completely deindustrialized for a few years, every day on the news it was one factory, more unemployment. But after the news was over, you go into a comedy show, a regular comedy show, or a TV drama, so everything was okay. You had this double-mindedness. And it was so bad that people were committing suicide. Britain ended up having the highest suicide rates in Europe because people just couldn't get jobs. Margaret Thatcher came on and said, a generation is growing up now who will never see work in their lifetime, so get used to it. And I had a neighbor who actually hung himself. And this was happening in all the streets, but no one wanted to talk about it. They went into a self-protective mode, didn't want to listen to anything negative at all. It was almost as though they would catch unemployment by talking about it. And of course, the whole New Age religion that's been put out there too. That's right. And remember too, it was the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry's own journal that came out in the 1950s saying they would bring in the New Age. And that was the name, in fact, of their journal. Eventually they changed it, their monthly magazine. And they said they'd create a new type of religion, and that ties in at the same time as you find Russell was publishing his books, talking about bringing in an egocentric culture that would just love themselves, it's all about me, and narcissism, which would split them off from being family groups and so on. Everyone would be into their own mirror image of themselves. What you're looking at, too, is the cult of celebrity. It's been risen to an amazing new height, and people follow them religiously, and they copy the fashions, they copy the actors, they copy the lifestyles as best they can according to their budget. And in their fantasy little world, where they have no power at all, they feel they have power in this fantasy world. It's no different than a driver today. An average guy who feels powerless gets behind a wheel, and suddenly he's the king of the road. And because it's the only place he feels he's got any power. It's the same thing with your little dream world of narcissism. Yes, and that shows you the incredible brain damage that they have. And I really mean that. People do have brain damage from their inoculations and from their food. There has been a covert war. You're seeing the end product of it now. The IQ has officially dropped, and it's been admitted by the United Nations. That's right, and therefore your ability for self-preservation, which is an essential part of warfare, you must destroy that part in an enemy if you want to take them down. They have been doing it quietly, covertly. In fact, again, Brzezinski and other ones, and even Russell too, came out and said that this will happen to the public. He said, Russell actually said that eventually, because of these techniques, and he meant covert techniques, they would never tell you what they were doing to you in reality. He said eventually the thought of rebellion will be as foreign to them and as impossible as sheep. Yes, absolutely. But again, it's the cult of celebrity. They said they would do this, and the celebrity, people follow them so meticulously and religiously and try to become them. Remember, Plato said the same thing, that they will use, and he said it in these terms. He said the fashion industry, the drama or entertainment, and sports is a big part because the people emulate what they see the actors doing. That's part of it, but now it's time as well to use all drugs. I mean, you've got half the population on psychoactive drugs or Valium types of tranquilizers anyway. So they want the public to be very tranquil as we go through these massive changes by any means possible, so they don't really care what you're taking. Yes, because the idea is that no one is supposed to escape this whole new system of surveillance. Eventually, it'll be impossible to go anywhere without your proper security card or even the chip.
Go ahead, Alan.
And not only that, though, they've talked about putting all your inoculation records on that chip. And one day you'll walk into a store, and if you're not up to date with something, alarm bells will go off, and the cops will grab you immediately and drag you off to the cell. Yeah, so this is a system, a complete system. That's what I mean by it. There's no choices in this system. It's either their way or no way, and they want to make sure that no one can survive outside their system. This war has been going on for thousands of years to destroy complete independence. That's right too. It's such an easy trick to do, is to entice people and this is free, that's free, just put up all your details here and use the system. And we've had that with Facebook. The guy had it right from the beginning. He was going to sell the data.